This title is narrated with virtual voice, computer-generated narration for audiobooks. The Music of 1964 by Ken F. Jarrell. Introduction. I was just shy of my 11th birthday when I, like most North Americans, first saw the Beatles on The Ed Sullivan Show on Sunday, February 9, 1964. Since the show was on Sunday nights from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. with school the next morning, the younger kids in my family could not watch the whole show. We did get to stay up to see the first real North American TV appearance by the Liverpool group, but only when they opened the show and not their return performance in the second half of the show. I actually never saw the Beatles' second-half performances until decades later when I bought the DVD set of the 4 Sullivan shows that featured the Beatles. Ed Sullivan, that was a man who knew what he was doing. If you wanted to see the headliners again, you had to sit through a string of lesser talents, which on any given Sunday could be acrobats, jugglers, stand-up comedians, Broadway acts, or even Señor Wences, a ventriloquist who drew a mustache on his hand and used it as a puppet, and who would sometimes finish his act with plate spinning as seen here. One controversial episode occurred on the second appearance of the Beatles' on The Ed Sullivan Show, although it wasn't the Beatles that caused it. That show was broadcast from the Deauville Hotel in Miami, and the air conditioning gave out. The multi-talented Mitzi Gaynor was singing and dancing up a storm on that show in a low-cut outfit and sweating profusely in the non-air-conditioned room. The sweat was accumulating on her exposed cleavage, and she was condemned the next day by the Catholic Church for her lascivious behavior. It was falsely believed she had oiled up her breasts. You can hear Mitzi's delightful recollection of that famous show here. When the Beatles appeared that historic Sunday, I am sure I was not the only kid whose parents said some variation of, "They won't last 6 months." This proclamation varied a little in the actual number of months the Beatles were given in the limelight by parents. I think my dad said 2 months. My parents' view, I am sure, didn't waver even when one of my mom's favorites, Ella Fitzgerald, crossed over to the dark side and did a cover of the Beatles' "Can't Buy Me Love" later in 1964, or when Paul McCartney, unaccompanied by the other Beatles, performed a stunning live version of "Yesterday" on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1965, seen here. The other Beatles topic sure to garner comments from parents everywhere was, of course, their hair. When the Beatles landed in New York, the New York Times reported that the best-known trait of the Beatles was their hair, which never seemed to be cut. At their raucous press conference upon their arrival, the Beatles were asked if they planned to get haircuts while they were in the States, and George Harrison said he just received a haircut, in fact, the day before. Memories fade over the years, but if you look up the Beatles' appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show on those 3 consecutive Sundays in February of 1964, you may be astonished at how neat and how short their hair actually was, and further astonished at how young they all looked. Because they were young, incredibly young, John Lennon and Ringo Starr were 23, Paul McCartney 21, and George Harrison was still just shy of his 21st birthday. You may be curious about the act that followed the Beatles on that first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. It was a magician named Fred Capps. My poor father, who loved the big band sound of Glenn Miller and Artie Shaw, didn't get any of it. One of my sisters likes to recount the story of my dad telling us one Sunday night to get ready because Ed Sullivan had some animals on tonight, not realizing that in reality, Ed had on the Animals, one of the very first British invasion groups to follow in the Beatles' footsteps in America. Decades later, I was driving my then 80-year-old mother in my car, and I had a Beatles CD playing by chance. My mother, who loved Doris Day, the Platters, the Ink Spots, Frank Sinatra, and Ella Fitzgerald, said, "So you still like the Beatles after all these years?"
To keep listening to this audiobook for free, click the link in the description. It will take you to a free Audible trial where you can listen to this and many other books for free for 30 days.